Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. My very special guest today is best-selling author Jessica Fellowes. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you. It's very nice to be here.
First of all, your thoughts on the Scottish referendum yesterday.
Oh, well, yes, no, it was quite exciting because all of my friends at home were having to stay up incredibly late, but because of the time difference here, I was having quite a relaxed time of it. So I went and had supper, and I knew by the time I came back I'd find out. So I was very happy. We had the final results when I woke up this morning, and I'm as British today as I was yesterday, so I was very happy about that. And Lady Rose McClare won't be an illegal immigrant in Downton Abbey now, so
That
all worked out.
That is a relief. Your uncle, Julian Fellowes, is the creator of Downton Abbey.
Mm-hmm.
Are you as hooked to the series as the rest of us?
As in touch with it?
Yes.
Yes, I absolutely love it. You know, it's kind of, I mean, I first started watching it along with everybody else. And when I wasn't doing the books at that point when the show first began, I was excited about it because, funny enough, Julian is unbelievably prolific worker, and it's impossible to stay on top of what he's doing this week, let alone this year. But he had mentioned more than once, he'd mentioned this period drama that he was writing that was being filmed, and I kind of got the feeling that he was a little bit excited about it. So I was, you know, and then there was obviously a bit of noise when it came out, and then suddenly, you know, boom, there it was, and then we've all been completely caught up in it. No, I mean, even if I wasn't writing these books, I'd be writing the show and enjoying it, and watching the show and enjoying it.
What do you think it is about the series that's made it such a monster hit?
Oh, well, I mean, if I could only bottle that formula, you know, I'd be writing my own, you know, but I think it's a combination of a lot of things. I think not least it's beautifully shot, very well acted, beautifully written, obviously. It's, you know, it's lovely to look at and we enjoy that. I think we, as humans, we kind of enjoy nostalgia, and it's period drama, but it's not so far away, you know, that's 100 years ago. So you probably got a picture in your photo album of your grandmother or your great-grandmother, you know, looking a bit Downton-esque, you know, somewhere with a kind, you know, there'll be a flapper dress, or you'll have heard the stories about when telephones first came in and what a shock it was, and, you know, all of that. So I think we can kind of relate to that element of it. And I think we enjoy the fact that we all sit down on a Sunday night. There's something very cosy about that in a world of lots of channels. We all kind of know we're all sitting and watching PBS, and it's, you know, and we can talk about it on Monday morning. But I think also there's a sort of subconscious thing I think that's going on, which is that the world has been through phenomenal change in the last few years. And that's what we're watching happen at Downton Abbey. The great theme of Downton Abbey is change. And we first met them in 1912 when the Titanic had just sunk. And as we go into season 5, that's 1924. It's only 12 years. And yet it looks as if 100 years have gone by. You know, the skirts are shorter, the women are voting, there's telephones, motor cars, they're switching their lights on and off. You know, the men with jobs in the family, you know, the chauffeur kind of married upstairs. And, you know, all of those things. And I think if we look at our own lives, even just 12 years ago, there were lots of things that perhaps were around but hadn't taken hold in the same way. So whether it's mobile phones, Google, Twitter, Facebook, Botox, gay marriage, you know, all kinds of things, you know, which have changed. As technology has affected our society and the framework in which we operate. So I think there's a kind of parallel going on. And when we watch someone like Violet sort of react with shock to these developments and strange new things happening in her life, we think, well, yes, I feel a little bit like that too. Sometimes everything that's happening is great. It feels very exciting. But sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming as well. So we take a little break from that and we sit and watch Downton Abbey, we cosy up with our family and have a cup of tea or a glass of wine on a Sunday night, you know, and I think it gives us that moment to get caught up in the stories, because that's what Julian is really good at, is stories that we want to watch week after week. Someone said to him once, why do you have to keep writing all these stories? Can't we just watch them getting on with their lives? He said, I'm not sure if that would really get people tuning in week after week, you know. So we're sitting and we watch the stories, we get absorbed in by those, and at the same time I think there's an understanding of what's happening in our lives.
He said that the Dowager Violet is based on his great aunt. Give us the inside scoop.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Julian's great aunt, my great great aunt, was Isie Stevenson. And she was born in, I mean, Violet would be a bit older than her, but they were similar in the sense that they were kind of brought up into a Victorian household and died in something incredibly removed from that. And Julian knew her, she died in about 1971, so she died just a few years before I was born. But when Julian was growing up, you see, in the 60s, there was a feeling that the world as they knew it was going to end then. Mm-hmm. And there was this, you know, the kind of expectation of the revolution would happen and everything. And I think he was really fascinated by the older members of the family who remembered this life before the Second World War, perhaps even before the First World War. And he really would seek them out and get them to tell him their stories. And that's why he's so brilliant at this show. He's basically lived these stories for a very long time. And Isie was someone that he really liked, and he said that she and Violet are very similar in that they have a mix of severity and kindness of heart.
That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah, so, you know, so both Violet and Isie, if you like, sort of believe in the nobility, the aristocracy, the divine right of rule, and the way of doing things, and heritage, and, you know, they want the world a certain way. But really, the most important thing is family. So you can overcome anything that's sort of a bit difficult to understand, or if it means protecting the family. And we see that with Violet, you know, with Mary, and even with Edith. You know, she's had to confront extraordinary realities for her, you know, with her granddaughters having sexual relationships outside of marriage, or illegitimate children, and, you know, all these kinds of things that she couldn't possibly have thought she would know how to deal with. But because it means protecting them, she does it. But Isie Stevenson also, she was just very interesting because she would tell Julian, she was an aristocratic, very, very beautiful. And in many ways, she had a very enviable life. She married very well. She married the heir to a rubber plantation, so she had lots of money, and, you know, she had these good looks, and famous artists wanted to paint her, and she had this very comfortable life. But in the First World War, her husband was killed. She went to meet him on leave. She ran down to the docks at Southampton, and she thought he was going to come running down the gangplank with his arms open, and instead he was carried off on a stretcher, very ill. And she took him to a nearby house and nursed him for months until he died. And then their only son was killed in the Second World War. She wasn't, in fact, a woman without hardship. You know, and Julian was particularly fascinated by what he sees. You know, he said these very strong women. He likes very strong women, and he said, you know, they face up to life and deal with it. So although they have this, you know, huge privilege on the one hand, they know how to deal with hardship on the other. And I think we see that brought out quite often in the female characters on Downton Abbey.
To what extent do you think Maggie Smith owns the role of Violet?
Oh, well, I mean, she is Violet. I mean, it couldn't be anybody else, you know, it couldn't be. And Julian did write the part for her. I mean, he very much wanted her to play it. And she said, you know, she has said, this is the third old lady I've played for Julian. I think I'm getting the hang of it now, because she was also Lady Trentham in Gosford Park, and she was in another movie that he wrote as a sort of older woman. And I think they enjoy great banter. She's very quick as well, Maggie Smith. So I think her and Julian have great banter. And he said, you know, she's such a superb actress with such brilliant timing, that he loves it, because he said he writes a line that he thinks is quite funny, and then she says it and it's absolutely hilarious. You know, she makes it even better. He does write all the words, though. I mean, there is, because some people said, oh, just Maggie Smith must be writing them, and, you know, no, all the singers are Julian's, but she brings to it, you know, absolutely something that I don't think anybody else could.
You mentioned the strong women characters in Downton. Let's talk also about, first of all, Cora. What's your quick take on her?
Oh, well, because she was the genesis of the whole show. Julian was reading a book about buccaneers called To Marry an English Lord, and he was thinking about the young American girls who went over to England in the sort of from about the 1880s onwards to marry into the aristocracy. And he thought, well, we know about that, but what about them 20 years later when they find themselves in a freezing cold castle in Yorkshire? And so that was Cora. So she's, you know, and she's great because she throws everything into relief. And I think that was how it felt for them. But, you know, because of her, we get to see that contrast where she's slightly saying, why do we have to do it this way? You know, and everybody else saying, well, because that's how we've always done it, you know. But I think that, again, that was a conversation, that was a mood that was very much happening at that time. This question, do we try to get back to the way things were after, you know, when they'd been through the First World War, or do we now embrace this opportunity to do things differently? And that's kind of the struggle that we see them going through. Mary particularly, you know, Mary and Cora have this very tricky relationship because Mary doesn't see herself as American at all, even though she's half American. She's always saying to her mother things like, you know, oh, you're American, you don't understand. So are you, you know, half American. But, you know, Mary is somebody who I think is much closer to her grandmother and is very sympathetic to the traditional way of doing things, but is beginning to find herself, I think, attracted to the future, you know, almost against her will. She's beginning to think, well, maybe actually I could do things another way.
What about Anna?
Anna, well, of course, she went through a very strong storyline in season 4, which was, you know, which I felt was handled incredibly well, and was a very good example of the show not shying away from the fact that not everything was good in the old days, you know.
But not exploiting it.
Yeah, exactly. No, they didn't. And I spoke to the actress Joan Foggett about that, you know, and she said she loves the challenge, so she wasn't frightened in that way. But she said she just really felt the responsibility of getting it right because she knew people would be watching it to whom it had happened or had had somebody close to them that had been through something similar. And she said the best way that she got to understand what was happening to Anna, because what the show was really interested in was not the assault itself, but the emotional fallout of something like that, you know, particularly at that time in 1922 when it happens, and how that would affect Bates and Anna's relationship. She's always been the positive one, and now suddenly, you know, it's going to be hard for her. And she said she spoke to the historical advisor for the show, and he said what you have to understand is that for a woman at that time, she only had her family, her career, and her relationship, you know, her reputation. And if she had told anybody about that assault, she was in danger of losing all of those things. I mean, that's just how it was then. You know, people would have said, "Oh, well, there's no smoke without fire," and so she had to keep this a secret. And not only did she have to keep it a secret, but there was this terrible thing of feeling shame. And Julian said that for him, what was very important, the reason he used the character Anna, was he said he felt that there's been a culture of assigning blame to victims when in fact there was nothing in it, in that situation that they found themselves in, that was their fault at all. And by seeing something like that happen to Anna, we understand that, you know. And women have written to him and said, you know, the same thing happened to me, and I never felt I could tell anybody because they would have blamed me for some of it. And watching her made me understand that I wasn't at fault at all. So that was why it was important, because lots of people have said, I could have dealt with it if it had happened to anybody but Anna. But that was why it was important, you know, because we would understand that there had been nothing that she had done to encourage or entice that event to take place.
I should note that many of these pictures we're showing come from your books, The Chronicles of Downton Abbey and The World of Downton Abbey.
Yes.
In what way do these books complement the series?
Well, what we do is we work very hard. There's no spoilers in the books. So we're very careful about that. And what I really want them to do is to absolutely enhance your watching of the show. So we talk about the characters and the plot lines and the things that they have been through and, you know, what's happened. And we talk obviously about how it's all brought to the screen, whether that's costume or art, the art department, production design, interviews with the actors and so on. But really the bit that I love the most and that readers seem to have enjoyed is the knowledge by stealth, which is just explaining what life was like at that time. So really putting it all into context, and we look at the sort of real life counterparts and the inspiration that Julian took, you know, for his writing, whether they were characters from our family or whether it was historical sort of figures or events that had taken place. So as you watch it, my ideal is that you're watching the show and, you know, Carson handles a wine glass in a particular way, or that, you know, the sort of the gentleman stand up when somebody comes in, and you nudge the person next to you and say, I know why they did that, you know, there's a reason that they did that. Julian actually always almost deliberately doesn't like to explain absolutely everything that goes on the screen. So sometimes a historical reference will be put in and you don't hear all that much more about it, you know, like the Marconi scandal that was mentioned in season 4 or season 3 maybe. But I explain those things in the books.
Oh, and do a great job. How tricky is it on a series like this to always be historically accurate, not just with the story, but with the props?
No. They work incredibly hard to be historically accurate. That's one of the main sort of premises of the show. I mean, Julian always believed, you know, you either, if you decide you're not going to worry about being historically accurate, that's fine, you know, and you can have a load of fun with that, you know, be like Games of Thrones or something, and, you know, it's fine. The history is just a sort of fun part of it. But with a show like this, it matters, because if you're accurate, then you allow the viewers to relax and believe in everything that they're watching. So they really mind, you know, and everything is very thoroughly researched. The difficulty is that there was no book that was published in 1910 to say, this is how to run a country house that everybody followed, you know, just as with today, people did different things in different houses. But what they do is they if they have enough, you know, as long as they have 2 or 3 sources to say it had been done like that, then they'll go with that. There'll always be someone popping up saying, but my great aunt did it, you know, completely differently. But
well, and then recently the plastic water bottle.
I know. I felt so sorry for them about that. But the problem, the annoying thing about that was that had originally been released as a cropped photograph, but they showed a good sense of humour about it, I thought.
Oh, I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah.
The follow-up photo with all of them holding bottles of water. This was a promo photo, for those who don't know, for the series, and it was just one of those little things that slips.
It was just one of those things that happened, but yeah.
You mentioned the costumes, and we all love the beautiful gowns that the upstairs cast members wear. Is it just as hard to dress the downstairs cast?
It is a bit simpler to do the downstairs, just because they wear that many fewer clothes. You know, the maids will have an outfit for their hard cleaning that they do when they get up early in the morning, and then they change their print dresses to something a little lighter for the lighter work that they have for the rest of the day. Carsten has obviously not changed one stitch of clothing since he first saw him.
No.
He's the only actor. I think he doesn't really have very much to do with the costume department. But they have, you know, as the years have gone by, they've tweaked it and updated a little bit. I mean, the point is, though, with Downton Abbey is that, you know, although the world around them is changing quite fast, the house moves a lot more slowly. So they can only take these influences on very gradually. I think the below stairs actresses, you know, do sometimes think, oh, it'd be quite fun to wear some of the dresses that the girls upstairs get. Yeah.
Yes, the gowns are very, very stunning. One of the things that I think you're able to do in the books is to take social issues and put them in a historical context. Thomas is an interesting character.
Yes.
And I wondered if you would visit a little bit about what it must have been like for him to be gay in this era.
I know. Well, I think it was an extraordinary thing. I think it was a very isolating thing. Julian was always very emphatic that he didn't want Thomas to hate that aspect of himself. You know, Thomas is actually quite accepting of that aspect of himself, unlike Bates' frustration with his limp, for example. You know, but it's what it illustrates quite well is that you know, at that time homosexuality was illegal. I mean, very illegal. You know, and Oscar Wilde is still the kind of, you know, the big story when it was at that time. But that was the example that everybody kind of looked to. But at the same time, although it was illegal, within smaller communities there was a general understanding that this kind of thing happened, and they would kind of tolerate it so long as there was nothing in their face about it, you know, for want of a better expression. So there were always the 2 brothers that ran the sweet shop in the village, you know, that then everybody just kind of knew probably they weren't brothers, but, you know, so there were quite a few examples of that. And I think what happens with Thomas is that he faces this kind of this conflict within himself, in that he would like to leave Downton Abbey. I think he's quite ambitious. He would like to do other things, but he can't because nobody else, or he can't guarantee that anywhere else would be as accepting of him as they all are at Downton, you know. So as difficult as he finds them, as difficult as they find him, there is an understanding. And yet, even though they understand and are fairly sympathetic to him, he couldn't really do anything about it. You know, he couldn't say, oh, and now I have a boyfriend, and expect them all to be fine about it. You know, that just wouldn't have happened. They can do it as long as, you know, it's kind of like that. But I think, it must have been very extraordinarily lonely, I think. And so I think it's quite nice because I think Julian allows us and makes it difficult for us in a way with Thomas, because he's so awful about, you know, some things, you know, he can really be horrendous. And yet you can't always condemn him completely, because you think, well, that comes from somewhere, you know. Of course, you would be bitter, you know, it would affect your heart if that was how you had to live your life. So, and Julian loves to do that, you know. I mean, that he likes to do what he calls the classic Downton conundrum, where you just don't know which side of the fence to sit on. You know, you watch one bit and you think, oh no, of course, you know, I feel for them, and then, you know, and that's what he likes to do all the time.
We get so tied into the personal lives of these characters that we really react to their tragedies, to their triumphs. Why in the world did your uncle let Matthew die?
Oh.
And then Lady Sybil. He could have stopped that.
I know. Well, Lady Sybil, she was the actress Jessica Brown Findlay, and she asked to leave the show. And although they were sad to see her go because they liked her very much, they sort of felt, well, you know, they're in the business of making a TV drama, so, and they had 3 daughters, and they thought, well, you know, actually that could open up quite an interesting storyline. So they did that. They kind of killed her off. And then after that, the actor Dan Stevens came and said he thought he'd like to leave the show. So that was quite a dilemma for them. They didn't actually really want to kill off someone else quite so quickly. But what they felt was that they basically, when it, you know, looking at the kind of the character situation, Matthew and Mary had first met in 1912. They'd effectively spent 10 years getting the two of them, you know, Willowdale, when they'd finally kind of got together. Mary was pregnant. They couldn't have them just divorce. You know, it just wouldn't have been believable to the audience, you know, that they would split up. They couldn't sack Michelle Dockery and have them both, you know, emigrate to America. I mean, that's not fair to her. She wants to stay in the show. So unfortunately, it had to be mortal death. There was no way out. And he won't be coming back because they didn't have showers then. So I'm afraid he really has gone.
Do you ever disagree with your uncle on the direction of the series?
No, I don't think so. That's a good question. I mean, obviously, I have nothing to do with it, you know, and I just read the scripts after it's come in and been done. But no, I think, I mean, the thing that I just can't believe, you know, that is amazing, but it's absolutely true, is that he pulls it all out of his own head. I mean, he is the sole scriptwriter. There's no team of scriptwriters doing this. It's all Gillian. And so I'm constantly amazed at how fresh she keeps it. And, you know, I mean, there are discussions, obviously, with the producers about, you know, whether the storyline should be bigger or larger, or smaller, or whatever. But really, you know, all those lines, and it's so, you know, it's still sharp. And I get really excited about it each season. I think season 5 will be great because we're really heading into the middle of the 1920s now. So all of those sort of feelings, those kind of post-war changes that were starting to be felt are really taking hold now. And the girls are looking great. You know, the costumes are amazing. All of that is really fun to watch. So I think this will be just as good as they've all been.
And you've got a new book coming out.
Yes, which is great. So, A Year in the Life of Downton Abbey. And we just did a slightly different thing this time. What we have done is, again, we've looked at the show and the way it's made and the historical context. But what we really felt was that, you know, from talking to readers, because I do a lot of talks around America, and so from talking to readers and viewers and things, you know, they just love they love the show so much they almost want to be in it. You know, people quite often turn up in full 1920s outfits to hear my talks and things, you know. I've seen brilliant replicas of Lady Sybil's trouser outfit and, you know, all that kind of thing. So we thought we'd give them more opportunity to really interact and engage with the show. So we look at the house across the year. It's seasonal, so it's all the celebrations, the traditions and the recipes, so you can do your own Mrs. Patmore's, you know, Downton dinner party if you want.
Do British viewers respond in the same way that Americans do?
Yeah, they do actually. I think they have a different relationship with it in that it feels more personal. It's more of a personal comment on their history, if you like. But they love the characters and the storylines. It took off very quickly. I mean, that was the most astonishing thing about it when it began, was literally within 2 or 3 episodes it had become this cultural reference point. And Gareth Neame, the producer, describes the moment when he sort of knew it had happened, when he was sort of in the shower with the radio on, and he heard somebody in the House of Commons talk about something, making a Downton Abbey reference, and he thought, wow, you know, that's it. It's really kind of gone everywhere now, and that was very, very quick. Of what we absolutely, and one would have hoped for that. You know, they put a lot of work in that, in the show, you know, and they hoped for that. But what you absolutely couldn't have predicted is the global phenomenon that it's become. That's been really extraordinary.
Do you think your uncle knows how the series is going to end?
I don't know. That's a very good question. I don't know. I don't think he does, actually, because I think, you know, when they began, you don't dare to look too far ahead. I think they sort of had a 5-year plan. They kind of thought, best case scenario, if it worked out well. But I think, you know, it'll probably go on beyond that. I think it's a bit, you know, it's a big train they're all riding now. You know, so I don't know how it stops. And lots of things. I think he's also enjoyed responding to the actors. He said he's talked about that. When you write a movie, you have to complete your character's arc. But with TV, it's kind of open-ended. Sometimes the actors find that quite a challenge because they'll be reading a scene and they're not quite sure what's going to play out in the next one. But so no, who knows?
Thank you so much for being here, Jessica. And thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.